The kingdom of Sheba was a land of beauty and wealth, its palaces glistening under the desert sun, its gardens blooming with fruits and flowers that astonished travelers from every corner of Arabia. Situated in the southern part of the Arabian Peninsula, Sheba's fame stretched far and wide. Traders spoke of its spices, its incense, its gold, and its queen, a ruler unlike any other, a woman whose name echoed across valleys and seas, Bilqis, the Queen of Sheba. Her story is one of the most fascinating accounts preserved in Islamic tradition, told in the Qur'an and enriched through the narrations that followed. Yet, alongside her grandeur and wisdom, a mystery surrounded her origins. Was she a mere human queen, blessed with extraordinary power and intellect? Or was she something more, a being with blood of the jinn in her veins, explaining her unmatched aura and presence? To find the truth, one must journey into the story as preserved in the Qur'an. Bilqis ruled Sheba at a time when empires thrived through power and deception, but unlike other monarchs who depended on brutality, she ruled with wisdom. Her people adored her, for she brought them prosperity and security. Yet even the mightiest ruler is tested when confronted with the truth of Allah, and so it was destined that her life would cross with the Prophet Sulaiman, son of Daud, the king whose dominion stretched not only over men, but also over birds, animals, winds, and even the jinn. The Qur'an describes the moment Sulaiman discovered the existence of Sheba. He was seated in his court, surrounded by his armies of men, birds, and jinn, when he noticed the absence of the hoopoe bird. Soon the bird returned with astonishing news. "I have come to you from Sheba with sure information. I found a woman ruling over them, and she has been given everything, and she has a mighty throne. I found her and her people prostrating to the sun instead of Allah." The news stirred Sulaiman's heart. A queen ruling a nation was extraordinary in itself, but the greater matter was their worship of the sun. A throne described as mighty implied power and splendor, but without faith it was hollow. Sulaiman, the prophet king, knew that his duty was not to conquer for wealth, but to guide for truth. He sent a letter to Bilqis, commanding the hoopoe bird to deliver it. The letter was simple but powerful. In the name of Allah, the most merciful, the most compassionate. Do not exalt yourselves above me, but come to me in submission to Allah. The moment Bilqis received the letter, her life changed. She sat in her palace, the golden throne beneath her, the scroll in her hands, and her advisers gathered around. Her mind, trained in leadership and diplomacy, weighed the matter carefully. She did not mock the letter. She did not ignore it. Instead, she consulted her council. "O eminent ones, indeed a noble letter has been delivered to me. It is from Sulaiman, and indeed it is. In the name of Allah, the most merciful, the most compassionate. Do not exalt yourselves over me, but come to me in submission." Her advisers, as loyal warriors often do, suggested war. They boasted of their strength, their armies, their readiness to defend the throne. But Bilqis was not rash. She was a queen of wisdom. She knew wars brought devastation to lands and people. "Indeed, kings," she said, "when they enter a city, they ruin it and make the most honored of its people humiliated." Instead of rushing to war, she decided on a test. She would send a gift, lavish beyond imagination, to see whether Sulaiman's claim was of a prophet or merely another ruler hungry for wealth. Her envoys set out with treasures, gold, jewels, silks, gifts that could seduce the greediest of kings. Yet when they reached Sulaiman's court, the reality astonished them. Sulaiman was unmoved. He looked upon the treasures with disdain. "Do you provide me with wealth? What Allah has given me is better than what He has given you. Rather, it is you who rejoice in your gift." He sent the envoys back, warning them that if they did not submit, he would come with armies they could not withstand. When Bilqis heard the response, her heart stirred with something she had never felt before. Here was a king unlike any other, uninterested in gold, unconcerned with worldly bribes, a ruler who commanded birds and winds, whose words carried the weight of truth. She knew then that this was no ordinary invitation. It was a call to something far greater. Yet before she could reach him, Sulaiman prepared another test, one that would forever mark her story in the Qur'an. Sitting in his court, surrounded by men and jinn, he asked, "Which of you will bring me her throne before they come to me in submission?" A mighty jinn stepped forward, boasting of his strength. "I will bring it to you before you rise from your seat." His confidence was absolute, but then another rose, one who had knowledge from the book. He said, "I will bring it to you before your glance returns to you." In the blink of an eye, the mighty throne of Bilqis appeared before Sulaiman. Sulaiman did not rejoice in conquest. Instead, he lowered his head in humility. "This is from the favor of my Lord, to test me whether I will be grateful or ungrateful." When Bilqis finally arrived, exhausted from the journey, her eyes fell upon what seemed to be her throne. Sulaiman asked, "Is your throne like this?" She hesitated. The resemblance was undeniable, yet something was changed. "It is as though it were the same," she replied, astonished. She realized then that she was not standing before a mere king, but before a prophet who commanded the unseen. The Qur'an describes her next step with beauty. She was invited into a palace whose floor was made of glass, so clear that she mistook it for water. Lifting her garments, thinking she would step into a pool, she found instead that it was solid glass. The palace of Sulaiman, built with the help of the jinn, was unlike anything she had ever seen. In that moment, her pride melted. She saw clearly the difference between worshipping the sun and worshipping the creator of the sun. She declared with humility, "My Lord, indeed I have wronged myself, and I submit with Sulaiman to Allah, the Lord of the worlds." This was the moment her story became eternal. A queen who had ruled with wisdom and wealth, who had once been distant from faith, bowed her head in submission to Allah. But the mystery of her origins remained. The Qur'an does not describe her as half jinn, nor does it call her anything other than human. Yet over the centuries tales spread, whispers that her mother had been of the jinn, that her legs were unlike those of ordinary women, that her unmatched power came from otherworldly blood. These were stories born of fascination, mixing truth with imagination. Some narrations said she had the legs of an animal, a feature hidden beneath her garments until the glass floor revealed it. Others said this was merely legend, and the truth was simpler. She was a woman, human like all others, chosen by Allah to witness His signs and submit to His truth. Her throne, her wisdom, her beauty, these were gifts from Allah. Her submission to faith was her true crown. The first part of her story ends here. A queen of great power, introduced in the Qur'an not to be mythologized as half jinn or otherworldly, but to remind mankind that even the mightiest rulers are humbled when the truth of Allah comes before them. When Bilqis declared her submission to Allah in the court of Prophet Sulaiman, the story of her faith was sealed in the Qur'an forever. Yet what followed after became the subject of endless debate among historians, poets, and storytellers. Her throne, her wisdom, her mighty kingdom of Sheba, all were well attested. But one question lingered like a shadow through the centuries. Who was Bilqis truly? Was she simply a human queen, blessed with rare gifts, or was she touched by something beyond humanity, half-jinn, born of mysterious parentage? The Qur'an itself gives no hint of her being anything other than human. It speaks of her throne, her people's worship of the sun, her wisdom in avoiding war, her test with the palace of glass, and her eventual submission to Allah. Nothing in its words suggests she was half-jinn. Yet, human imagination has always been drawn to mystery, and the extraordinary presence of Bilqis invited legends to grow. Legends of Bilqis' birth and some traditions passed down outside the Qur'an. It was said that her mother was from the jinn, while her father was human. These accounts suggested that her extraordinary rule and aura came from this mixed heritage. Some storytellers claimed that her beauty was otherworldly, but that she had the legs of an animal, a detail said to have been revealed when she mistook Sulaiman's glass floor for water. Others insisted that this was not literal but metaphorical, meant to highlight her uniqueness. One popular tale recounted by poets described that when Bilqis walked upon the glass floor, Sulaiman glimpsed her legs and saw they were covered with fine hair, a sign of jinn lineage. Yet this story carried the scent of myth more than fact. Scholars of tafsir often dismissed it as folklore, warning that such stories distract from the Qur'an's real message. Bilqis was not defined by her body or her origins, but by her choice to submit to Allah. Still, the idea of her being half-jinn persisted for centuries, especially because of her connection with Sulaiman, the prophet who commanded jinn. People reasoned, if Sulaiman's court included beings of smokeless fire, perhaps Bilqis herself shared a link with them, the power of her throne. One reason people suspected Bilqis was more than human lay in her throne. Described as mighty in the Qur'an, her throne was so magnificent that even the hoopoe bird marveled at it. Thrones of ancient rulers were symbols of their power, but Bilqis' throne was unlike anything seen before. Some narrations described it as carved of gold, inlaid with precious stones, standing on 4 pillars, each adorned with jewels of different colors. Others said it was surrounded by soldiers day and night, guarded with secrets. When her throne was brought to Sulaiman, in the blink of an eye, it stunned not only her, but the jinn themselves. How could a human throne inspire such awe? For some, the magnificence of her throne was further proof that Bilqis was no ordinary woman. They imagined that only a queen of half-jinn blood could possess such treasures. But again, the scholars of truth reminded people that Sheba was already known for its wealth. The land of Yemen, fertile and rich, produced spices and goods traded across Arabia, Africa, and India. Bilqis did not need jinn lineage to explain her power. Sheba's natural wealth, her leadership, and Allah's decree were enough. The role of jinn in Sulaiman's story, to understand why the question of Bilqis' origins arose, one must consider the role of jinn in Sulaiman's kingdom. The Qur'an is clear that Sulaiman was granted dominion over them. They built his palaces, crafted his weapons and dived into the seas to bring him treasures. His court was a place where men, birds, animals, and jinn gathered together under his command. It was here that her throne was brought, by one with knowledge of the book faster than the strongest of jinn. It was here that her test took place in. A palace built with their labor, a palace whose glass floor confused even a wise queen. Seeing Bilqis step into this world of jinn and men, people began to wonder if she too belonged partly to the unseen. Perhaps it was easier for them to believe she was half jinn than to accept that a mere human woman could wield such authority. Bilqis' wisdom and the suspicion of men another. Reason for the half-jinn stories was the unease of men in ancient times toward women of power. A woman who ruled, who commanded armies, who counseled with wisdom, such a figure was rare in a world dominated by kings. For many, it was easier to explain her greatness by claiming she was not fully human. Legends often arose to diminish the achievements of remarkable women, surrounding them with whispers of witchcraft, magic, or unnatural origins. Bilqis, however, required none of that. Her wisdom was proven in her refusal to rush into war with Sulaiman. She showed humility when confronted with truth. She guided her people not through fear, but through diplomacy. These were not the qualities of a half-jinn monster, but of a human queen guided by reason and eventually by faith. Scholars' reflections. In later centuries, scholars debated the legends. Some preserved the tales of her jinn heritage, repeating them in books of history. Others strongly rejected them. The great scholars of tafsir emphasized that the Qur'an itself said nothing of Bilqis being half jinn. Instead, it highlighted her wisdom, her throne, and her submission to Allah. They reminded people that the Qur'an presents Bilqis as an example of humility. She was a ruler with everything, wealth, power, and armies. Yet when confronted with the truth, she did not cling to pride. She did not wage war. She bowed her head to Allah. This, they said, was the real lesson. To debate whether she was half jinn or human missed the point. The symbolism of the glass palace, the story of the glass palace also fueled the myths. Some claimed that when Bilqis lifted her garments, Sulaiman discovered her secret, that her legs were not like human legs. Others said he only saw they were covered with fine hair, which embarrassed her. Still others dismissed these tales, saying, the real miracle was the glass itself, a technology of transparency unknown at the time. For the faithful, the glass palace was not about revealing Bilqis' body, but about revealing her soul. When she realized the floor was not water but glass, she also realized that her throne, her power, her sun worship, all had been illusions. The palace showed her the difference between reality and deception, just as the message of Allah showed her the difference between falsehood and truth. A queen transformed, regardless of her origins. What mattered most was her transformation. When she said, my Lord, indeed I have wronged myself, and I submit with Sulaiman to Allah, the Lord of the worlds, she became an example for all time. Her story teaches that no matter how powerful one may be, the true honor lies in bowing to the Creator. The legends of her being half jinn may add color to the imagination, but they are unnecessary to the lesson. The Qur'an did not preserve her story to entertain, but to teach. And the teaching is clear. Even the most powerful are humbled before Allah, and even those raised in false worship can find their way to truth. Yet the fascination remains. For centuries, poets, historians, and common folk alike continued to ask, was Bilqis simply human or something more? Her name traveled through Persia, Ethiopia, Arabia, and beyond, each culture adding its own flavor to her legend. In Ethiopia, she was remembered as Makada, Mother of Kings. In Yemen, she was honored as a queen whose throne still lingered in ruins. In Arabia, she was remembered with awe, sometimes with suspicion. The half-jinn theory, for those who insisted she was half-jinn, it pointed to her unmatched throne, her mysterious aura, and her encounter with Sulaiman as proof. They said her beauty was so powerful it could not belong to a mere human. They claimed her wisdom surpassed that of men, because she was more than human dot, but the scholars pushed back. Was it not possible for Allah to grant such wisdom to a woman without her being half-jinn? Was it not enough that she was human, yet extraordinary? Did not the Qur'an highlight her decision-making, her diplomacy, her humility? Why reduce her greatness to myths when her humanity itself was the true miracle? A test of perception, the question of Bilqis' origin became itself a test for later generations. Would people focus on legends of her being half-jinn, or would they see the lesson Allah placed in her story? Would they marvel at her throne and her mysteries, or would they marvel at her humility before faith? The scholars reminded that jinn, though real, are not greater than humans in honor. Allah made mankind his vicegerents on earth, granting them knowledge, dignity, and responsibility. To claim Bilqis' greatness came from jinn blood was to diminish the dignity Allah had already given to mankind, and so the story of Bilqis became layered, the Quranic truth of a wise queen who submitted to Allah and the human fascination with myths of half-jinn ancestry. The name of Bilqis lived on long after her palace of Sheba crumbled into dust. Her throne, once the pride of a wealthy empire, became a memory, her wisdom a lesson, and her submission to Allah a timeless reminder. Yet the debate about her nature, human or half-jinn, lingered across cultures, echoing in poetry, folklore, and sermons. The Qur'an itself remained silent on such speculation, but the human heart, forever drawn to mystery, clung to legends. The spread of her story across nations in Yemen, storytellers spoke of Bilqis as their ancestral queen. They pointed to ancient ruins, great dams, and temples, claiming they had once stood under her command. In Ethiopia, she was remembered as Makeda, the Queen of Sheba, who journeyed to meet a great king and bore a lineage of rulers. In Persia, poets marveled at her throne and her diplomacy, weaving her tale with their own legends. And in Arabia, she was remembered most of all for her encounter with Prophet Sulaiman. But with each retelling, details changed. Some emphasized her beauty, others her power, and still others her supposed otherworldly origins. Over centuries, her story became a mirror, reflecting the imagination of each people who claimed her. Why the half-jinn? Myth persisted. The persistence of the half-jinn myth was not surprising. People of old often explained greatness with supernatural origins. A queen who ruled a wealthy nation with wisdom and courage was too rare to accept as merely human. Instead, they insisted she must have been more than mortal. The mysterious aura of Sheba, its wealth, its sun worship, and its fall into the pages of history all fed the legend. Moreover, her encounter with Sulaiman, a prophet who commanded jinn, blurred the lines in people's minds. If jinn were present in his court, why not in hers? If he tested her with a glass palace that revealed hidden truths, perhaps she too carried secrets. And so, across generations, the myth persisted that Bilqis was half jinn, her legs not like those of ordinary women, her oa more than human dot. The scholarly response, yet scholars of tafsir were cautious. They reminded believers that the Qur'an is the ultimate source of truth. The Qur'an described Bilqis as a queen with a mighty throne, a woman of wisdom who consulted her counsel, a ruler who avoided reckless war, and finally, a servant of Allah who submitted with humility. The Qur'an did not call her half jinn, nor did it describe her body in detail. Some scholars explained that the story of her animal legs, or jinn lineage, originated from Israeliyat, tales borrowed from earlier traditions, mixed with imagination. These narrations, though widespread, were not reliable. To dwell on them, they warned, was to miss the point of her story. Her story was not about whether she was fully human or half jinn. It was about how even the most powerful rulers, when faced with truth, must bow before Allah. Her greatness lay not in her bloodline but in her humility. Lessons for later generations. The story of Bilqis carried lessons that echoed in Islamic history. Leaders were reminded that wealth and thrones, no matter how mighty, are illusions compared to the truth of faith. Scholars used her story to teach that true wisdom lies not in pride but in consultation, humility, and recognition of Allah's signs. For women, her story was a beacon. In a world where female rulers were rare, Bilqis stood as proof that women, too, could lead nations with justice and intellect. Yet her story also reminded that leadership, whether male or female, is a trust from Allah, not a source of arrogance. For the oppressed, her transformation was hope. If a queen who once worshipped the sun could find guidance, then anyone could. No matter how lost, every heart has the capacity to turn back to Allah. The symbol of the throne, her throne, mentioned with awe in the Qur'an, became a symbol across cultures. It represented power, wealth, and pride. But when it was brought to Sulaiman in the blink of an eye, its meaning changed. It became a reminder that no matter how strong human power may seem, Allah's power surpasses it. Thrones may impress men, but to Allah, they are nothing more than dust. When Bilqis saw her throne before her, altered and humbled in Sulaiman's court, she realized that her power was fragile. That moment shattered her pride and opened her heart to truth. The glass palace revisited. The palace of glass, built by the jinn under Sulaiman's command, was more than a marvel of architecture. It was a test of perception. To Bilqis it appeared as water, deceiving her eyes. When she lifted her garments, she realized the reality was different. This, scholars explained, was symbolic. Just as the palace revealed the difference between illusion and reality, so too did Sulaiman's message reveal the difference between sun worship and the worship of Allah. What she thought was truth, the power of the sun, the grandeur of her throne, was mere illusion. The reality was Allah, the creator of all things. Bilqis' submission. When Bilqis finally said, "My Lord, indeed I have wronged myself, and I submit with Sulaiman to Allah, the Lord of the worlds," her story reached its climax. She was no longer the Queen of Sheba alone. She became a servant of Allah, a believer whose faith was her true crown. This submission was the heart of her story. Legends of half-jinn origins, animal legs, or mysterious bloodlines were distractions. The truth was simple. Bilqis was human, chosen by Allah to be tested with power and then guided to faith. Reflections from the family of the Prophet. Narrations from the household of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, reflected on Bilqis as a figure of wisdom and humility. They emphasize that Allah raises whomever He wills, whether king or queen, man or woman, human or jinn. What matters is not origin but obedience. Imam Ali often reminded that leadership is a trust and that arrogance destroys nations. The fall of Sheba and the submission of Bilqis were examples of this truth. Imam Hussein's stand in Karbala carried the same message. Thrones and crowns are temporary, but standing for Allah is eternal. Why the truth matters, the debate about. Bilqis' nature was never about curiosity alone. It reflected a deeper question. How do we view greatness? Do we explain it with myths of jinn and magic, or do we recognize that Allah grants greatness to whomever He wills, without the need for superstition? The Qur'an settled this question without words of doubt. It gave Bilqis her honor as a wise queen, but it gave her true greatness in her humility before Allah. Legacy of Bilqis centuries later, the ruins of Marib in Yemen, believed to be part of Sheba's kingdom, still stand. Travelers gaze upon them and remember Bilqis. Her story continues in churches, synagogues, and mosques, each tradition retelling it in its own way. But in Islam, the Qur'an preserved her truth, free of exaggeration. Her story lives not in myths of half-jinn blood, but in the reminder that faith transforms. She began as a ruler who prostrated to the sun. She ended as a servant of the Lord of. The world's dot was Queen Bilqis, half-jinn or human. The Qur'an gives the answer not by speaking of her body, but by speaking of her heart. She was a human queen, wise, powerful, and blessed with wealth, who humbled herself before Allah when the truth reached her. The myths of her being half-jinn grew from fascination, fear of female power, and human imagination, but they are not part of the Quranic truth. The Qur'an honors her as a ruler who made the right choice to leave behind false worship and embrace the worship of Allah. Her story teaches timeless lessons, that wealth and thrones are illusions compared to the power of Allah, that humility is greater than pride, even for rulers, that guidance can reach anyone, no matter their origin or past, that greatness is not in bloodlines or myths, but in submission to the Creator. Queen Bilqis remains one of the most remarkable figures in history, not because of legends of jinn, but because of her courage to bow her head when confronted with truth. She began with a throne of gold, but her true crown was faith. That is the Quranic truth of Queen Bilqis.